The global trade war escalates. 25% US tariffs on Canada and Mexico are now in place, and levies on Chinese imports are doubled to 20%.
There are growing fears of a major global trade war tonight after President Trump announced sweeping tariffs.
Stay with President Trump's tariff issues now. The US president has hinted that the European Union could be next to face tariffs.
Trump just made a massive mistake. The European Union is gearing up to hit back harder than ever, and they're not bluffing. After Trump threatened tariffs and accused the EU of being designed to screw America, Brussels fired back with a warning. They're ready to unleash their ultimate trade weapon. This isn't just talk. The EU's trade bazooka is designed to retaliate against harsh tariffs, quotas, investment restrictions, you name it. It's their strongest trade tool yet, created specifically in response to Trump's first term. And now they're ready to pull the trigger. If the EU makes good on its threat, could this spark a full-blown economic war between the US and Europe? How would American industries survive under massive retaliatory tariffs? And is Trump pushing the US into a trade disaster that could cripple the economy? We're breaking down the full story and exposing what this means for the future, so stick around. It's no secret that Trump has had it out for the EU from day one. He's never hidden his disdain, calling it a scheme designed to rip off America and lumping it in with other international organizations he thinks are out to bleed the US dry, like the World Trade Organization and the World Health Organization. To him, the EU's just another one of those nasty global power players, flaunting its massive trade surplus with the US while cozying up under America's military protection. Remember his infamous complaint about too many luxury German cars clogging up Fifth Avenue? Yeah, that's how he sees it. A one-sided relationship where America foots the bill while Europe gets rich. But back in his first term, Trump's attempt to go head-to-head with the EU didn't quite pan out. He thought he could break the bloc with tariffs and pressure, but Europe stood firm. Instead of caving, they hit back just as hard, rallying together to push through retaliatory measures that kept Trump's trade war from sinking their economy. The EU managed to hold its ground despite Trump's America First crusade. But now it's round two, and Trump's back with a vengeance. Just a few weeks into his second term, he's already made it clear that Brussels isn't going to be treated any better this time around. The EU's trade chief made the trip to Washington hoping to find some common ground, but instead, Trump cranked up his tariff threats even more. Then there was the blatant snub of the EU's foreign policy chief by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, making it painfully obvious that the administration doesn't intend to take Europe seriously. It's a complete shift in attitude. Trump's strategy is no longer about dealing with the EU as a whole. It's about isolating national leaders and playing them against each other. The plan? Divide and conquer. He's banking on exploiting cracks within the EU, especially with countries like France and the UK pushing their own agendas. French President Emmanuel Macron and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer have both stepped up, trying to position themselves as the voices of European response, while Brussels struggles to keep its grip on unity. And this time, Trump has found an unexpected ally, or at least a common adversary. The Kremlin's long-standing animosity toward the EU lines up perfectly with Trump's current anti-Europe push. Both see the bloc as an obstacle to their ambitions, and the political turmoil surrounding the Ukraine war has only made the EU's position shakier. It's a perfect storm of pressure from both sides, and Brussels is scrambling to stay relevant as national leaders take charge. The big question now is whether the EU can withstand this new wave of hostility from Washington. Can the bloc rally together again like it did during Trump's first term? Or will internal divisions leave it vulnerable to being picked apart by Trump's divide and rule strategy? And with Europe's economic future hanging in the balance, how far is Trump willing to go to secure what he sees as America's rightful dominance? The EU says it's ready to retaliate, but if Trump's learned anything from his first term, it's that he needs to go harder and faster to break them. And that's exactly what he seems determined to do. But just when it seemed like Trump had the upper hand, the EU pulled out its ace, something nobody saw coming. They just hit back with a threat so massive that it's sending shockwaves through both Washington and Brussels. The EU has announced that it's prepared to unleash its most powerful trade weapon, the so-called trade bazooka. Officially known as the Anti-Coercion Instrument, ACI, this mechanism was specifically designed in response to Trump's first-term trade war. Back then, Trump tried to break Europe's resolve with tariffs on steel and aluminum, but they didn't back down. Now, with Trump once again ramping up his economic aggression, the EU isn't just playing defense, they're getting ready to fire back. The message was delivered loud and clear by Agriculture Commissioner Christophe Hansen during a press conference in Paris, standing alongside French Agriculture Minister Annie Genevard at the Salon de l'Agriculture farming exhibition. Hansen made it crystal clear: we have an anti-coercion instrument, and we will have to use it. It's not just tough talk. The ACI is designed to strike back hard when the EU faces what it considers economic bullying, like tariffs, quotas, or investment restrictions. It's essentially a one-stop retaliation shop, and the EU is saying it's done being pushed around. The timing couldn't be more deliberate. Just a day earlier, Trump had made it known that he might slap a 25% tariff on European cars and other goods. That kind of broadside sent European leaders into a frenzy. Politicians from across the continent demanded retaliation, and the pressure on Brussels was mounting fast. Trump's comments accusing the EU of being created to screw the United States crossed a line. Leaders like Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk publicly condemned his remarks, reminding the world that the EU was formed to foster peace and economic stability, not to undermine America. But for Trump, it's all about leverage. He sees Europe's economic power as a direct threat to America's interests, and he's determined to push back, no matter how many allies he alienates in the process. His administration's narrative paints Europe as an economic freeloader, exporting luxury cars to the US, while hiding behind higher tariffs and complex value-added taxes that supposedly disadvantage American products. In response, EU lawmakers aren't just sitting back. Bernd Lange, the chair of the European Parliament's International Trade Committee, didn't mince words. We will not let ourselves be bullied, not with tariffs nor with threats about our legislation. And it's not just tough talk. The EU is prepared to revive some of the retaliatory tariffs it imposed during Trump's first term. And that's just the start. If the situation escalates, they could extend these tariffs even further, inflicting serious pain on key American industries. The most vulnerable target? German automakers, especially BMW, whose massive South Carolina plant exported nearly 250,000 vehicles last year. It's no secret that Trump's base in South Carolina has been one of his strongest. But if those exports get hit, it could shake things up in his own backyard. But the real shock is how fast the EU moved on this. Just a day earlier, French President Emmanuel Macron had practically been rolling out the red carpet for Trump, even doing a Fox News interview to steer Trump's anger toward China instead of Europe. It seemed like a diplomatic victory until Trump dropped his tariff threat less than 24 hours later. Macron's charm offensive crumbled instantly, leaving EU leaders feeling like they'd been played. So now the EU's done playing nice. They're making it clear that they're ready to hit Trump where it hurts, economically and politically. They're not just reacting to the latest threats. They're setting a precedent that the EU won't be a punching bag for Trump's economic power plays. The question now is, will Trump double down and push forward with his tariffs, risking a full-blown trade war with one of America's biggest allies? Or will the looming threat of the EU's trade bazooka force him to reconsider? The stakes couldn't be higher, and the world is watching closely to see which side will blink first. If Trump moves forward with his 25% tariffs on European goods, especially targeting the auto sector, the ripple effects will be felt worldwide. This is not just a simple tit-for-tat between two economic giants. We're talking about a potential trade war that could reshape global alliances, disrupt markets, and trigger long-term economic consequences that no one is fully prepared for. First, let's break down the immediate economic fallout. The European economy would contract by about 0.4% in real GDP terms within the first year, a significant hit in such a short time frame. The US wouldn't escape unscathed either, seeing a 0.17% contraction. While those numbers might seem small on the surface, remember that these are average figures across the entire economy. Specific industries, like the automotive sector in Germany, could see production declines as steep as 4%. That's a major blow to one of Europe's most vital economic engines. But it doesn't stop there. If the EU follows through with its own 25% retaliatory tariffs, the economic damage to the US could double, and the EU would absorb additional losses of 0.14 percentage points. Inflation would inevitably follow, as American businesses struggle to absorb higher costs for imported goods and intermediate inputs. Consumers would feel the squeeze too. Price levels in the US could increase by up to 1.5%. Think about what that means in practical terms. People will notice everything from groceries becoming noticeably more expensive, manufacturers passing higher costs onto customers, and domestic industries struggling to stay competitive. This economic shockwave wouldn't be contained to the US and Europe. Other major economies would be forced to reconsider their trade strategies as the transatlantic rift deepens. China, for instance, could see this as an opportunity to strengthen economic ties with Europe, exploiting the divide to solidify its own influence on the global stage. Asian markets would be on high alert, bracing for the possibility that shifting trade patterns could disrupt supply chains and affect manufacturing outputs. And then there's Russia, watching the fallout with a sense of opportunity. As the US and Europe tear each other apart economically, the Kremlin could push for deeper energy ties with Europe, especially as EU countries look for cost-effective ways to counterbalance rising production expenses. It wouldn't be surprising to see Moscow exploiting the situation to increase its leverage over European energy markets, further destabilizing the geopolitical landscape. Domestically, the fallout would be brutal for Trump's political capital. American manufacturers relying on imported components would face exorbitant costs, leading to factory slowdowns and potential layoffs. Industries that once benefited from Trump's America First mantra could suddenly find themselves struggling with declining competitiveness and shrinking profit margins. That's not exactly a winning message for an administration trying to tout economic growth and job creation. Meanwhile, Europe would be scrambling to maintain internal cohesion. The bloc's unity is already under strain from differing national interests, and the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. A full-blown trade war with the US would only deepen these divisions, as some countries push for reconciliation, while others demand aggressive retaliation. Leaders like Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer would have to navigate a minefield of political fallout, trying to balance national interests with the broader goal of maintaining EU solidarity. But perhaps the most significant impact of all is the potential shift in global power dynamics. For decades, the US-EU alliance has been the bedrock of the Western world's economic and political order. A trade war could fundamentally fracture that relationship, pushing Europe to seek new alliances with China or Russia, or even consider a more independent economic path. This would mark a major shift from the post-World War II era, where the US and Europe worked hand in hand to build a global economic framework rooted in shared values and mutual interests. Trump's unilateral approach to trade, however, has thrown that relationship into question. If the EU retaliates with its trade bazooka and the conflict spirals, we could witness the erosion of one of the world's most powerful economic partnerships. The real problem here is the unpredictability. Businesses are already paralyzed by the uncertainty, finding it nearly impossible to plan long-term investments or maintain stable supply chains. The fear that tariffs could escalate into broader economic warfare is enough to send markets into a tailspin, and that kind of volatility benefits no one. The stakes are monumental. If Trump pushes forward and the EU retaliates, it could very well redefine global trade norms. Other nations will be forced to pick sides, align themselves economically, and brace for whatever comes next. It's not just about cars and steel, it's about a global power struggle that could rewrite the rules of the international economy. Whether Trump sees this as a power move to dominate Europe economically, or just another part of his broader strategy to reshape America's global role, the long-term consequences could be catastrophic. We're not just talking about short-term economic pain. We're talking about the potential unraveling of the economic partnerships that have defined the modern world for decades. The big question now is whether cooler heads will prevail before this turns into an all-out economic conflict. Or is this just the beginning of a new era of global economic rivalry, where alliances fracture and economic nationalism reigns supreme? Only time will tell. But one thing's for sure, the world is watching, and the fallout from this standoff could be felt for generations.